Shana Tova to everybody. I am now in the rabbi's study, as you can see, not in the sanctuary, and I have here as my guest Mr. Richard Hirschhaut, who is the regional director of the American Jewish Committee in Los Angeles. And Rick, you bring to this position some 30 years of civil rights, humanitarian and Jewish community advocacy, and we're very happy to have you join us this Rosh Hashanah, as we hope 5781 will be much healthier a year and a much quieter year than the one we are leaving. And that doesn't take very much to beat that. Okay, so Richard, please introduce yourself and tell us about the American Jewish Committee, what it does, and what's in the background there over you.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi. It's a pleasure to be with you and the congregation today, and let me express an amen to your wish for this new year. May it be one of good health and well-being and prosperity for the Jewish people and for the world over. So it's a privilege and honor to be with you today. And I think probably the most important introduction I can make is my pride in being the son-in-law of Alex and Violet Satmary, Olav Shalom, and the husband of their daughter Susan. And so I know how much the congregation meant to my mother and father-in-law, and I'm bringing some of their love that was poured into me into this session today. The American Jewish Committee is the oldest of America's human rights and civil rights and human relations agencies, created in 1906. We are a U.S.-based, of course, organization, but with a global presence. And in fact, the byword, the slogan, if you can distill it down into one central thought, is that we are all about global Jewish advocacy. And that takes many forms and many shapes, but we do have a voice that is credible and built upon decades of service and accomplishment that we bring to the table. Just to share a little bit about the backdrop behind me, we are engaged in a renewal of bonds and a specific partnership with the National Urban League in advancing and creating and writing, hopefully, a new chapter in the relationship between Blacks and Jews in America. It's a historic alliance with tremendous chapters of accomplishment and achievement and brotherhood and sisterhood, but it's an alliance that is in need of a recharge, and in many ways a reset. And during this moment of great national introspection across the United States, what better time than to reinforce and restart this important relationship.
Okay, very good. Yes, I'm glad we have that personal family connection. Your father-in-law would sit right in the front row in front of me on Shabbat in blessed memory, and he had a hair-raising story of his own to tell. That's for another event. So here we go, Richard. We had thought of some key topics, and certainly from the perspective of worldwide Jewry, probably finally looking for something good in the news. Perhaps the most positive has been the opening of diplomatic relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and now Kosovo and Serbia moving embassies into Jerusalem, and more Arab and African states on the way in opening up relations and improving relations with Israel. So what does it mean for us as Jews who care for Israel?
Well, this is, any way you view it, a historic breakthrough and an absolutely positive development for those of us who love and care about and seek a secure and vibrant and thriving Israel that is accepted among the family of nations globally, but certainly and increasingly in the neighborhood where she is in the Middle East. This is a game changer. This is the first time in 26 years that an independent Arab republic has made peace with Israel. And it is hopefully the beginning of a series of similar moves by other Gulf states and other nations within the region. There's a recognition, I believe, that in many respects, the paradigm has shifted. For so long, the narrative had been, and this was often the messaging coming from Arab capitals, solve the Palestinian conflict, resolve that quarrel, and then we can talk about peace. And now there is a recognition that peace ought not wait. There is too much pressing, there is too much opportunity for exchange of technological assistance, of military and defense assistance, of human interaction for us to wait any longer. And that with the thawing of relations and hopefully the opening of more and more tracks for eventual peace with other Arab nations, then we can come to some peaceable resolution of this long-standing conflict. And so for Israel and the UAE, it is tremendously exciting. The ceremonial first flight on the El Al plane just a few weeks ago, flight 971 to Dubai, which is the country code for international dialing on the way to the UAE, and flight 972 on the return journey, the country code for Israel, as we all know. But it was this is something that has been many, many years in the making. And I don't think it's going too far to say that AJC, the American Jewish Committee, has had a significant behind-the-scenes hand in urging and encouraging and cajoling the UAE to take this bold step. I have colleagues who have traveled quietly to the UAE for more than 20 years for conversations, for high-level discussions, simply to create and sustain a channel of communication in the hopes that one day we might see what we have witnessed over this last month or so. So it is a very exciting moment, and hopefully an important next step and catalyst for others to follow. So we're very excited by this agreement.
You talked about, working behind the scenes. My sister-in-law in Houston, Helene Zadok, was president of the chapter there of the AJC, and she and her husband were in the Emirates a few years ago. Maybe it was arranged by AJC.
I would imagine it was, because I can tell you, I've been with AJC now for about a year. I should have given a little more background. I have, as you kindly mentioned, been privileged and blessed to work in the Jewish community relations arena for my entire career now, some 37 years in. Most of that time with the Anti-Defamation League, some of that time helping to create the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Skokie, and then with other Jewish humanitarian organizations. And as I've continued to learn about AJC over this last year or so, one of the strengths of this organization is that the volunteer lay leadership really do roll up their sleeves and are part of the mission and part of the advocacy that we do. So there are many, many board members sprinkled around the country who can point proudly to their having been to the UAE. And frankly, they deserve credit as well for putting a face on the Jewish community, putting a face on what it means to be a Zionist and to be someone who seeks and dreams of an Israel at peace. And so every trip that was made, every nuanced interaction, every telephone call, every memo, all of this added up. And it was, I think, the culmination of a strategy that is not for the faint of heart, and that is to be in this for the long game, to recognize that it may take more than a few years, it may take a few decades, but ultimately to keep our eyes on the prize, as we've seen come to fruition over this last month.
Very good, very good. Next theme here. It's no news to you or to any of us that in the Jewish community in the United States, now coming back home, we've had our nerves rattled, to say the least, with the spate of attacks on Jewish targets, synagogues not far, Poway, for example, and also attacks on Jews who are visibly Jewish, particularly in New York area where Hasidim have been attacked. And now in the wake of the Floyd George killing and the ensuing protests, we see the rise of dangerous groups on both extremes looking for street fights, street brawling. And it is very worrisome. Someone who's a student of history, my father went through this in 1920s and 30s in Berlin, Vienna and Berlin, and was in prison as a result. And those extreme left and extreme right took to street brawling in Germany, each betting that the actions would cause an uprising, and it did. And we know what happened to us and to the world. So we are very anxious. Is this happening to us? Are we in danger here?
Well, we're certainly living through a period of time, and it's very important that you offered, I think, that and shared, thank you, that historical context. We're living through, in many ways, an unprecedented period in American life, where the structure of democracy, the foundations of our liberal democracy are being challenged, are being strained and stretched to the limit. And we see in the streets extremists who have taken to vigilante justice, in their view, who have taken to expressing their animus toward enemies, real or perceived, in their minds, in expressing that view with hate and with violence. This is an unprecedented time for American Jews as well. What we saw in with the tragedy in Pittsburgh almost 2 years ago, followed by Poway 6 months later, and other episodes in America, certainly hate episodes outside of our borders as well, that we've become not desensitized to, but more accustomed to, if you will. But here in America, it requires a vigilant and thoughtful and strong response, certainly from law enforcement and other investigative bodies, but I think even more so, it requires leadership from the top. It requires a certain tone setting that makes clear that violence and anti-Semitism and religious and racially motivated bigotry have no place in American society. They can't be, there can be no equivocation when it comes to hate speech in terms of calling it out, even if it's legal. The First Amendment, of course, is a sacrosanct principle. It's why it is our First Amendment to the US Constitution. But it does not enable, it does not protect those who would incite or foment violence. And that's where I think sometimes its interpretation becomes a little bit fuzzy. We have to see anti-Semitism and anti-minority sentiment responded to forcefully, strongly, to send an unmistakable message to the would-be perpetrators of these crimes that they will not be able to commit their acts with impunity. And that's a message that unfortunately has been uneven in America in recent years. We have seen equivocation, we have seen rationalization, we have seen the politicization of messages of hate in a way that I certainly cannot recall throughout my professional life. And hopefully this moment in American life, and perhaps this leads us into a little bit of this moment and the demonstrations on the streets and the issues as you've raised, this has to be a moment of genuine self-examination and reckoning, so that we can create a better America, a more empathetic, a more inclusive, a more hopeful society with opportunities to healthcare, education, economic opportunity that simply does not exist for the number of Americans that it should exist for today.
So we need deep-seated responses and not superficial slogans, which is what we usually get from all ends. So let me ask you this now, because it takes us to another question. And that was very important that you have this conference on Black-Jewish unity. And as Jews, we're naturally concerned where there is suffering. We've been on the beating end of the stick for a long time, so we understand when it's happening to others also. And so it's natural that we gravitate to political positions that seek to address suffering, especially in the US, where it's especially been expressed in terms of race. That's the way in America it was particularly expressed. So we have, in the past, forged strong ties with mainstream African-American organizations. They go back at least a century. Leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, National Association of Colored People, or coming more recent times, when I was a young man growing up, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we even have today, as of last week, a new Jew, the African-American basketball star Amire Stoudemire, right, who joined the fold. He became an observant Jew, right? So we have that kind of relationship. But we're also disturbed, on the other hand, by the outspoken hatred by some figures such as Louis Farrakhan, and the echo chamber that goes on in some elements of the woke community that go hand in hand with David Duke. Bougalou Bois, the right-wing group, tried to organize some activity together with Hamas, the extremist Islamic group, which is the group then that the woke people sympathize with. So how do we make sense of this? How do we address it?
Well, I think, again, I want to believe, and in my experience have seen that the overwhelming number of people, the overwhelming majority in our communities are people of reason, people with much more centrist, open-minded points of view. However, there are extremists, of course, among us, in our midst. And it is incumbent upon the mainstream not to breathe oxygen into or wind into the sails of the extremists, either by pretending they don't exist or even tacitly acknowledging, and sometimes more than tacitly acknowledging, that their point of view is somehow reasonable or fair-minded. That's where we begin to lose the battle. I have had very close familiarity for many, many years with Minister Farrakhan in the Nation of Islam. His entire entity is a house of cards. It's a facade. But because of the strength of his rhetoric, and the unwillingness of reasonable voices to call out hate when they see it, and to not recognize that even if 2% of his message is imbued with hate, and the other 98% is about self-empowerment, it's still a poison pill for that larger message, and it must be called out. The late, great Congressman John Lewis never gave one iota of attention or respect to Minister Farrakhan. He saw through the bigotry and simply would have no part of it. That's the kind of principled leadership we need. However, all of that said, we need to have partners to talk to. And we need to have community leaders who with whom to engage, because there are fine mainstream organizations like the NAACP, as you mentioned, like the National Urban League, with whom AJC partnered just very recently, earlier this month. And we need to be able to go forward in shared purpose and with a common agenda. I believe it's a mistake if we make, if we require first, before any of that good work happens, a denunciation of extremism, denunciation of the more hateful elements in either of our communities. That's a quid pro quo that I believe is a non-starter. We need to deal with it. We need to talk about it. We need to encourage, but I simply would not make that ever a prerequisite for engaging in the important community building work that we need to do. The fact is, and the FBI has documented this, that the African-American community leads by far in the number of racially motivated bias crimes, hate crimes reported in recent years. On the religious side, it's the Jewish community, the anti-Semitism and the violence that you mentioned, of course, with Pittsburgh and with Poway, and less violent, but no less impactful and hurtful episodes that we've seen in recent years.
Very, very important. I remember back in the 90s, Board of Rabbis, a meeting with Reverend Cecil Murray, who was the head of the largest African-American church, and talked about Frahan, said he has no followers, no real followers in the community here, and yet people give him credence, which is, I don't know, beyond understanding. No, well, let's go ahead, because it does take us into the next thing, and that is how all of this is impacting our own young Jews. And the reason I say this is, you well know, University of Southern California, president of the student body, resigned because she was attacked maliciously at student gatherings, verbally, not physically, because she did not renounce Zionism, did not denounce Israel. So we are finding on supposedly the good guys, the academic world, an intimidation of our young adults if they show any kind of Jewish identity towards Israel. What's happening there?
Well, the campus is unfortunately a battleground. It is not a new one, but it seems to have taken a more insidious turn in recent years. There is a term that is often used to describe what takes place on the college campus, and that is cancel culture. And what that means is, particularly among progressive groups and young people who genuinely, with their idealism, with their energy, want to see and want to be part of shaping a better world, rolling up their sleeves and building a better society for themselves and for, one day, God willing, their own kids and their families. What we often see is that anyone who is identified as a Zionist, which for you and me, and certainly for the congregation, has a certain meaning, the legitimate effort and movement towards self-determination in the historic Jewish homeland, that takes on a different meaning for many others. When others hear Zionist, they think colonialist, oppressor, genocidal policies, and takes on a very, very different meaning. So a young Jewish college student who wide-eyed comes onto campus, signs up for any number of activities, the hiking club, the public affairs club, the nature society, you name it, whatever it is, as soon as they are seen and discovered to be Zionist, they are canceled from everything else. And we saw that at USC recently when actually a vice president of the student government was harassed viciously for being Zionist. And she had other opinions about other issues, and people were free to agree or disagree, but they zeroed in on her pro-Zionist, her love of Israel, her affinity for her belief in Israel, and used that to maliciously target her. All of this online, mind you. This was as vicious an episode as you could imagine. None of this happening on campus or in person, all of it virtually because of COVID. And I think we are, and the campus certainly is seeing the impact of this, because campus administrators, and we work very closely with well-meaning, sincere, authentic campus professionals who want to build a climate of acceptance, who want to see civil disagreement, civil engagement, because that's what a university environment should be about. Opening our minds to thoughtful, polite debate and discussion and consideration without without the attached sense of intimidation or feeling under threat. And that's really where the breach and the violation took place at USC. The administration initially was a little slow to respond as this was beginning to bubble up, and now has done a 180 and is saying all the right things, that universities should be just as protective and just as sensitive to Jewish students as they are to any other student on a diverse, large, important college campus. And so we're working very closely with USC. We hope to be part of a multi-pronged strategy. I believe we will be on issues of training, on issues of policy, changes in the conduct code for students, and opportunities to really treat this as a teachable moment for all, not just for the students, but for the administration and for the larger alumni community.
It's very important. The irony is that I know the head of the academic senate, and he's Israeli born himself. So it is very ironic there.
I would add that a number of professors, mostly in the really multidisciplinary coalition of academics, also went on record with a letter taking great issue at the harm to the campus environment caused by this recent episode.
That's what, it's not only microaggression, it's a macroaggression.
Correct.
It really is. So you know what? I think we covered so much ground on this day. This is going to be made available for our members, and then on a wider basis to all the people who follow us on the Facebook and YouTube. And I want to thank you so much for the time and for the work that the AJC is doing. You know, we know alphabet soup of Jewish organizations. Some 600 different organizations signed on to Black Lives Matter ad this year. Who are the organizations? We don't know which organizations really count, but AJC, we know, has been involved in the forefront for needs of the Jewish community and the American community here and worldwide. And so thank you for the efforts that you are doing with your
company. Very much my pleasure, Rabbi. And let me mention, we're an organization that is a big tent and always welcoming of new voices and of interested congregants and community members who want to be part of us. All you need to do is sign on to our website, which is ajc.org, and sign up at the bottom of the homepage to receive updates, to be invited to interesting webinars with world leaders and with community leaders and everybody in between. And we certainly welcome all of you, and again, wish everyone a sweet, healthy, and most importantly, just a happy New Year.
Same to you. Same to you and to the family, everyone. Shana Tova, good year.
Shana Tova.